There is a Goku who has already won every fight, every rival, every god who ever dared to stand across from him. He climbed a ladder that had no top, and then he built the rungs above it, and climbed those too. And now, there is no one left. So what happens when the strongest being that has ever existed reaches back down through everything, past the gods, past the stars, past the very memory of struggle, and lands on a single dying world, on the exact day he first learned what it meant to lose? What if Goku, the SSJ9K Goku, the one nothing in creation can touch, fell back into the Frieza saga and came face to face with the desperate, mortal boy he used to be? Written by me. Suggested by JalenGod17. This one is yours, and if you've got a collision burning in your head, any universe, any character, from any world that has ever existed, drop it down below. Name the fighter. Name the world. The next impossible meeting starts in the comments. Now, let the god come home. At the top of everything, there is a silence you can hear. He had stopped calling it a place a long time ago, because place was a word for things with edges, and this had none. It was simply the summit, the last high point of a reality he had climbed so completely that nothing above him remained but the smooth, endless white of a sky, with nothing behind it. He stood there the way a man stands at the peak of a mountain he has finished conquering, boots planted, arms loose, and looked out over a horizon that offered him nothing back. He had been the strongest for so long that he could no longer remember the shape of the day he had become it. That was the thing no one warned you about, not the loneliness. He'd been ready for loneliness. It was the forgetting, victory upon victory, each one erasing the last, until the winds piled so high they stopped being events and became weather. Gods had come. He had answered them. Titans had risen out of the dark between universes, wearing power like armor, promising at last, a fight. And he had ended them between one breath and the next, and felt nothing but the small, cold click of a lock turning in an empty house. The aura around him no longer roared. It didn't need to. It hung there, a standing pillar of white gold light, so total that the nothing around him bent to make room for it. His eyes had no color left in them, only a clean molten silver, because color was a thing that happened when light met resistance, and nothing resisted him anymore. He closed those eyes, and in the dark behind them, the way it always did when he was this quiet, a memory surfaced, not a victory, never a victory. Those were gone. What surfaced was the other thing, the thing he chased down into the silence again and again like a man pressing on a bruise to be sure he could still feel. Fear. He remembered fear, not the idea of it, the taste. Copper at the back of the throat. The animal certainty that the next few seconds would decide whether the people behind you lived or died, and the sick knowledge that you were not strong enough, that you had never once been strong enough, that strength was a thing you were about to have to invent in the space of a heartbeat, or watch everything you loved go dark. He had felt that exactly once in a way that had remade him, a green sky, a friend in the air, a finger rising, and out of that single unbearable second, a monster had been born, a golden thing that would go on to climb the ladder and build the ladder higher and end up here, at the top of a silence you could hear. His eyes opened. They were not calm anymore. Something moved in the silver, old and hungry and unbearably tender. He could not fight his way to a stronger opponent. He had proven that, but he could do the one thing his power had always let him do and had never once let him undo. He could reach, down through the smooth white of the summit, down past the gods he'd broken and the stars he'd outlived, down through the nested shells of every reality stacked beneath his own, down to a small green world on a specific afternoon, where a version of him still existed who did not know how any of it turned out, who still had it in front of him, who was, right now, in this exact instant, standing at the bottom of the ladder with copper in his throat, and a friend in the air. He didn't reach to change it. He told himself that, carefully, the way you tell yourself a thing you are not sure of. He reached to feel it, one more time, to stand in the same red air as the last version of himself who had ever truly needed to become something, to be near the fear, since he could no longer be inside it. The white summit did not shatter, or tear, or break like anything fragile. He simply stepped, and the whole architecture of reality that separated the top from the bottom folded aside for him, the way tall grass folds for someone who has walked a path 1,000 times. He fell without falling. Universes went by like lit windows on a night train, a flicker of a world where the war had gone the other way. A flicker of a world with 2 moons. A flicker, and he passed through all of them uncounted, drawn downward on the single thin thread of a power signature he would have known anywhere in creation, because it was the smell of his own younger blood. Then the air changed, and he arrived. Heat hit him first, not the clean heat of his aura, but a dirty, failing warmth, the fever of a planet in its last minutes. He stood on cracked green stone that was no longer entirely green. Veins of raw magma light ran through it, widening as he watched, and every few seconds the ground shrugged under a distant detonation. The sky was wrong in a way that stopped him for a full second even now, even at the height he stood at. It had been orange once, the soft alien orange of a Namekian noon, and it was going red, a deep arterial red, bruising toward black at the edges where the horizon was quietly coming apart. Ash drifted upward instead of down. The sea, off past the rocks, had begun to boil, and the steam of it climbed into the dying light, like the planet exhaling its last long breath. 5 minutes. Somewhere in the marrow of this world a clock was counting down from 5 minutes to nothing, and he could feel it, the way you feel a held note about to end. He knew this place. Of course he knew this place. He had stood on it, bled on it, nearly died on it, but he had never seen it, not like this, not from the outside, not with the terrible clarity of someone who had 1 billion years of distance and not 1 ounce of the old panic left to blur it. From here he could see how small it all was, how fragile. A cracked marble of a planet, minutes from the end, and on it, a handful of figures, no bigger than sparks. His gaze found them and did not let go. There, in the churned dirt beside a boulder split clean in half. Piccolo, down, 1 arm bent wrong, chest barely moving. Beside him a small shape in a torn purple gi, hair a black bowl cut, wide eyes fixed on the sky in helpless terror. Gohan, his son, younger than the god had let himself remember in a long, long time, and further off, unmoving in a shallow crater, a figure in cracked Saiyan armor, dark hair, 1 gloved hand, still half open, as if it had been reaching for something when it stopped reaching forever. Vegeta, dead in the dirt, exactly as he'd been the first time. The proud fool, and the god, felt something move in his chest that he had assumed was long since burned out of him. And then he saw the 2 that mattered. High in the poisoned air, unhurried, floating with the boneless ease of something that had never once had to try, was a sleek white shape crowned in purple, smooth-skulled, cold-eyed, a thin, cruel line of a mouth curling upward in the exact expression of a creature who owns everything it can see and is bored by owning it. Frieza, final form, the apex of this entire world, the tyrant whose name had made systems empty themselves into the dark rather than be found. From here, from the height the god stood at, he was. The god searched for the word and found it, and the finding of it hurt. Nothing. A local warlord, a big fish in a puddle about to boil dry. He could not have hurt the god if he'd been given 1,000 years and 1,000 more forms to do it in. And yet, below Frieza, on a shelf of splitting rock, stood the last figure, and the god of the summit, the being that nothing in creation could touch, felt his breath go out of him. He was so small. That was the thing the memory never got right, and the thing the distance made unbearable now. The boy, the man, but from up here, from 1 billion years on, only ever a boy, was ragged past the point of standing. His orange gi hung off him in strips, 1 sleeve gone entirely, the blue beneath dark with blood that might have been his and might not. His spiked black hair was matted with dust. His chest heaved with a rhythm the god's own chest had long forgotten, the ragged bellows work of a body running on nothing but refusal. His eyes, dark, still ordinary, still human in the way the god's silver eyes would never be again, were fixed upward with an expression the god knew from the inside. because he had worn it. The look of a man doing the math on a fight he already knows he is going to lose, and deciding, against every number, not to. There you are, the god thought, and did not know whether the tenderness he felt was for the boy or for himself. There I am. For a moment, none of them saw him. That too he understood. His power was so far beyond the scale of this world that their senses had no drawer to file it in. It read to them not as a warrior, but as pressure, a wrongness in the air, the way a room goes quiet before you consciously notice the storm outside. Frieza's cold red eyes flicked, once, sideways, and a hairline of unease crossed that perfect, confident face. There and gone. Dismissed. The little green survivor near Piccolo, the one called Dende, shivered without knowing why, and the boy, his younger self, felt it last and most, a prickle up the ruined length of his spine, and did not turn, because he could not spare the half-second, because every scrap of him was aimed at the monster in the sky. The god stood in the red light, wreathed in a power that bent the dying planet's air around him, close enough to touch the last version of himself who had ever been afraid, and he watched. And that was when Frieza, idle, cruel, wanting to break the ragged thing below him, before he broke the world, lifted one finger, and turned his cold eyes not to Goku, but past him, to the short, bald figure who had been trying to crawl unseen toward the others. To Krillin, the god's silver eyes went very wide. No, he thought, and it was not a word so much as a wound reopening, 1,000,000,000 years deep. Not yet, not this. This is the one. This is the second everything turned. Frieza smiled, and with a lazy telekinetic flick, as easy as lifting a cup, he plucked Krillin off the ground and into the air, limbs slack, face already twisting, rising helplessly, terribly, exactly as he had risen the first time. The boy on the rock shelf below screamed a name. The little tyrant in the sky raised his hand higher, savoring it, drawing the finger back to point, and time, for the god who had come home, seemed to stop. There it was, the finger raised, the friend in the air, the younger self breaking. The whole doomed tableau hung frozen in the red and boiling light, the single second out of all the seconds in his infinite life that had made him what he was. He had told himself he came only to feel it. He stood at the edge of that lie now, close enough to end it all with a thought, and found he did not know, for the first time in longer than the age of stars, what he was about to do. He did not decide to move. That was the truth of it, and it shook him more than any of the gods he'd broken ever had. For 1,000,000,000 years, every action had been a choice, weighed and executed from a great serene height, the way a man decides which of two identical stones to skip across a pond. But here, now, with the finger rising and the small body twisting in the air, something older than the god woke up under the god, something the summit had buried but never killed, and it moved, and took him with it. The distance between where he stood and where Krillin hung was, by the measurements of this dying world, a thing that would have taken even Frieza a fraction of a second to cross. The god did not cross it. He simply arrived, the way light arrives, without any of the moments in between agreeing to exist. One instant the red air over the boiling sea was empty. The next it held a pillar of white gold that turned the whole ruined sky the color of dawn, and inside that pillar, one hand raised, palm open, catching a small bald warrior out of the air, as gently as a father catches a sleeping child rolling toward the edge of a bed. Krillin's slack weight settled into his palm. The god looked down at the unconscious, terrified, breathing face, the 6 little dots, the scar, the whole ordinary sacred fact of him, and felt the 1,000,000,000-year deep wound in his chest do something it had not done since the day it opened. It began to close. The world caught up to what had happened all at once. Frieza's finger was still raised, pointing now at nothing, at a patch of air where his victim had been, and abruptly was not. The tyrant's face, that perfect mask of bored ownership, cracked straight down the middle. His red eyes found the pillar of light, found the impossible white-haired shape standing inside it holding his prey, and for the first time in the memory of the universe, Frieza did not understand something. His mouth opened, Nothing clever came out of it. The horns of his composure, so to speak, had been knocked clean off, and below, on the shelf of splitting rock, the ragged boy, who was not yet a god, stared up with his dark, ordinary eyes blown wide, his heaving chest gone still, and he made a sound that was not a word. The god heard it anyway, heard everything in it, the confusion, the desperate leaping hope of a cornered man who has just watched the impossible arrive on his side of the fight, and under those, quietest and most terrible, recognition, not of the face. The younger one couldn't see the face yet, not clearly, not through the glare, but some animal part of him knew, the way you know your own reflection in a dark window before your eyes resolve it, that the thing standing in the light was him, was going to be him, was what waited at the far end of the road he was, at this very second, bleeding to walk. The god turned, slowly. He carried Krillin's limp form in the crook of one arm now, cradled, and with the other hand he made a small gesture at the air, nothing dramatic, a flick of 2 fingers, and a cushion of his will lowered the little warrior down through the poisoned air to settle him, feather-soft, in the dirt beside the frightened green child, Dende, who scrambled back, and then, understanding, scrambled forward, and laid trembling, healing hands on the unconscious man. The god had reached out across creation and undone the second that made him. He had, in the space of a breath, cancelled the death that had lit the fuse of his entire ascent. He waited to feel the wrongness of it, the tear in the way things must be. He felt only relief, warm and vast and simple, and understood with a slow cold turning in his gut that he had lied to himself at the summit. He had not come only to feel the fear again. He had come to fix it. He had told himself otherwise because a being who could fix any moment in any world was a being who could never again trust that he'd left a single one of them alone, and that was a weight even his shoulders were not sure they could carry. Too late now. You, said Frieza. The god looked up at him. The tyrant had gathered himself. The mask was back on, mostly, though a hairline crack ran through it, that had not been there before, and would never fully close again. He floated in the red light with his arms folded, chin lifted, and regarded the white-haired intruder with the particular venom of a creature who has staked his entire existence on being the largest thing in any room and has just felt the floor shift. I don't know what you are, Frieza said, and his voice was silk over a blade. A Namekian trick, a guardian, some last, desperate card this mudball had hidden up its sleeve. His mouth curled. It hardly matters. You've made one very interesting mistake. Whatever you are, you've let me see you. His hand came up, and death gathered at the fingertip, a bead of light that could crack a planet's mantle. And I make it a rule, never to leave a curiosity unsatisfied. The god watched him build the attack, the way a grown man watches a toddler wind up to throw a spoon. He knew he should feel something. Anger, maybe, for Piccolo bleeding in the dirt, for Vegeta dead in his crater, for every soul this creature had fed into the dark. But the anger wouldn't come, and after a moment he understood why, and the understanding was its own kind of sorrow. You cannot hate the weather, you cannot rage at a candle. Frieza, the terror of the cosmos, the nightmare that had unmade civilizations. From the height the god stood at, he was a small, cruel thing having a small, cruel tantrum on a rock, and the only honest feeling the god could find for him was something dangerously close to pity. That, more than anything, was what a billion years did to you. It took your monsters away. Don't, the god said. It was the first word he had spoken since he arrived, and it landed strangely in the red air. Quiet, almost gentle, with none of the theater the moment seemed to call for. Frieza blinked. I beg your, don't throw it, the god said. You'll hurt yourself. He said it the way you'd say it to a child holding a knife by the blade. No threat in it, just a fact, offered kindly, because the alternative was worse. Frieza's composure went white-hot. Whatever this thing was, whatever unreadable power made the air bend around it, it had just spoken to him, to Frieza, to the Emperor of the universe, as though he were a nuisance, as though he were beneath concern. That, the god saw, was the one wound the tyrant's pride could not survive taking. Not being beaten, being dismissed. Frieza threw it. The bead of death crossed the space between them faster than the dying world's own light. It struck the god square in the center of his chest, at the frayed orange fabric over his heart. and stopped. It did not explode. It did not push him back a single centimeter. It simply arrived at his skin and ended, its planet-cracking energy unmaking itself against a surface that had no more reaction to it than a mountain has to a thrown handful of sand. The light guttered and died. A thin curl of smoke rose from the god's gi, where a small scorch mark now marred the weathered cloth, and he glanced down at it with the mild, distant regret of a man who has noticed a coffee stain on an old favorite shirt. Silence. Even the dying planet seemed to hold its breath. On the rock shelf below, the ragged boy made the not-a-word sound again, and this time the god heard the exact moment hope tipped over into something vaster and more frightening, the moment his younger self stopped hoping this stranger might help, and started grasping, dizzily, at what it meant that anything could exist, for which Frieza's ultimate power was a stain on a shirt. Frieza's face had gone the gray of old ash. "That's," he started. "That's not." "I know," the god said, not unkindly. "It's a lot. Take your time." And then, because the tyrant's hand was already flying up again, because the pride would not stop, because a creature like this would keep throwing spoons until the end of the world, rather than admit the world had a ceiling above his own, the god sighed, a small human sigh that did not belong to a being of his altitude, and he ended it. He did not fly at Frieza. He did not power up. There was nothing to power up from, no higher gear, only the smooth, infinite plateau of a strength that had left effort behind eons ago. He simply looked at the tyrant and closed the distance without seeming to move through it, and was suddenly there, a hand's breadth away, his silver pupilless eyes filling Frieza's entire cracking world, and he laid 2 fingers, very gently, against the center of the tyrant's chest. "Sleep," the god said. He let out a fraction. Not a blast, not a technique with a name and a shout, just a fraction, the smallest measured exhalation of the power he carried, dialed down so far below what Frieza could survive that a lesser control would have erased not just the tyrant, but the planet, and the star it orbited, and the 3 nearest systems for company. The god had spent 1 billion years learning to pour the ocean out through the eye of a needle. He poured, for less than an instant, the barest thread of it into 2 fingertips. Frieza did not explode. The god would not give him that dignity, that drama, that scale. Frieza simply stopped. The light went out of the cold red eyes between one instant and the next, gently, like a lamp switched off in a room no one was using anymore, and the tyrant of the universe drifted backward on the hot wind, limp, unmarked, unconscious. Not dead. The god had been careful, so careful, because he was done deciding who this world got to keep, and settled slowly toward the churning sea, like a discarded doll. The god caught him too, with a flick of will, and set him down on a spar of rock well away from the others. Even monsters, he had learned across the long silence, were worse when you made martyrs of them. Then he turned around, and found the boy already there. He had not heard him come. That, in itself, was a small miracle. His younger self had crossed the broken ground and half climbed, half fallen up the shelf toward the pillar of light on legs that should not have been able to carry him, driven by something stronger than his shredded body. And now he stood a few meters away, swaying, dark eyes enormous, blood drying on his face, staring up at the white-haired god with an expression the god had no billion-year distance thick enough to protect him from. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The planet groaned around them. The red sky pulsed. Off to the side, Dende's healing light bloomed over Krillin, over Piccolo, small green mercies in the middle of the apocalypse. "You're me," the boy said finally. It wasn't a question. His voice was wrecked, a rasp of a thing, but it was steady. "Aren't you?" The god looked down at himself, at his own face worn young and desperate, at the dark, ordinary eyes he'd traded away somewhere on the climb, and had not thought about missing until this exact second. "I was," he said, "a long time ago. Longer than you've got a number for." The boy swallowed. His gaze moved over the god, the impossible hair, the bending air, the scorch mark where a planet killer had died against his chest, and the god watched him try to fit it into a mind that had, up until 90 seconds ago, believed the Super Saiyan legend at the top of the mountain was the top of the mountain. He watched the boy fail to fit it, and keep his feet anyway, and it was the keeping of his feet that broke something open in the god's chest. "How strong?" the boy whispered. Not greedy, not awed even, almost afraid of the answer. "How strong do you have to get to?" He gestured vaguely at Frieza's limp shape, at the ended fight, at the whole impossible fact of the figure in front of him. To do that, and the god, who had come down through all of creation, to stand in the red light, beside the last version of himself who had ever been afraid, opened his mouth to answer, and found he did not know what to say, because the honest answer was this strong, and no stronger than this loneliness. This strong, and there is no one left to fight, and the silence at the top can be heard, and I came 1,000,000,000 years, and across every world there is just to stand next to you, because you are the last one who remembers what it felt like to need to become something. He could not say that to a boy on a dying planet with copper still in his throat. It would be like handing a starving man a map of a country with no food in it. So instead the god knelt, slowly, so the light of him wouldn't burn the shelf they stood on, and brought his terrible, serene silver eyes level with his younger self's dark, exhausted ones, and he said the only true thing he had left that a boy could carry. "Strong enough," he said quietly, "that I'd give a lot of it back, to be standing where you are right now." The boy stared at him. Above them, without any of them noticing, the red sky pulsed one final time, and then the ground gave a long, deep, tearing groan that was not like the others, and a fissure of white light split the horizon from end to end, and the dying planet finally, truly, began to come apart. 5 minutes, the clock had said, when the god arrived. The 5 minutes were up. The god felt the planet die the way you feel a wave build under a boat, a lift, a wrongness in the bones of the world, the deep structural certainty that the thing you are standing on is about to stop being a thing you can stand on. Namek was folding inward on its own broken core. The magma veins had become magma rivers. The sea was gone to steam. The horizon was no longer a line, but a widening seam of raw white, pouring up out of the wound in the crust. Minutes, the world had said. Now it was saying seconds, and saying it loudly. The boy staggered as the shelf beneath them bucked. He didn't cry out. He turned, instantly, without a half-second's thought for himself, toward the others, toward Gohan and the fallen Piccolo, and the small green shape of Dende still bent over Krillin, and the god watched his younger self's whole ravaged body gather itself to do something, to save them, with strength he did not have, on a planet that had run out of ground to save them on. That, the god thought, that is the thing I climbed the ladder to protect and forgot I was protecting, not the winning. That. I have them, the god said. The boy's head snapped back around. What? I have them, the god said again, gently, and this time he let a fraction of the summit's calm bleed into the words, the unshakable evenness of a being for whom a dying planet was a manageable inconvenience, so that the boy would hear it and, against all reason, believe it. All of them. You too. I need you to trust me for about 4 seconds. Can you do that? The boy looked at him, at the impossible white-haired thing wearing his own face, that had caught Krillin out of the air and switched off Frieza like a lamp, and some final knot of resistance in him, the deep Saiyan refusal to be saved rather than to save, went quietly slack. Not defeat. Recognition. You can trust a thing that is you, even a thing that is you 1,000,000,000 years on and made of light. Yeah, the boy rasped. Okay. The god stood. He did not gather energy. There was nothing to gather, only the ocean he already was. But he opened, slightly, the way a hand held over a candle opens to a hand held palm up under the sun, and his will went out across the dying world in every direction at once. It found Gohan, wide-eyed and bracing over Piccolo's body, and closed around him like cupped hands. It found Piccolo, breathing shallow, one arm ruined, and cradled him. It found Dende and Krillin under Dende's fading light, and the limp, discarded shape of Frieza far off on his spar of rock. The god took him too, because he had decided he was done letting this world lose anyone, even the ones it might have been glad to lose. It reached across the churning surface and found, in a shallow crater, the still armored form of Vegeta, dead in the dirt, one hand half open, and the god paused over that one, for just a moment, feeling the old ache, and gathered him up as gently as all the rest, because the dead deserve to not be left to burn. He held them all, every living soul on the dying planet, and one who wasn't living, suspended in the field of his attention, weightless, untouched by the heat that was now peeling the very rock to vapor. And then, as the horizon seam finally split wide, and the white came roaring up to take the world, the god did the second impossible thing. He did not fly them off the planet. There was no off left. The space around Namek was already filling with the light of its detonation, and outrunning it, even at his speed, would have meant dragging a fistful of fragile mortals through the raw fire of an exploding world. Instead, he reached the same reach that had carried him down through creation to get here, and he folded a pocket of elsewhere around the whole gathered handful of them, a bubble of the summit's untouchable stillness, and he stepped. Namek exploded. From the outside, from the black of space, it was a soundless flower of white fire blooming where a green world had been, a light that would take years to reach the nearest surviving eyes, a grave the size of a planet. Every rock the god had bled on, every ridge, the shelf where he had knelt and told the truth to a boy, all of it, gone into the dark in a single expanding breath of annihilation. And 100,000 kilometers out, hanging in the sudden cold silence of open space, inside a bubble of impossible stillness, the god, and everyone he had saved, watched it go. The boy pressed his hands flat against the inside of the bubble, invisible, but solid as glass under his palms, and stared at the dying light of the world where he had almost died, where he would have died, where in some other version of everything Krillin had died, and lit a fuse that burned for 1 billion years. His reflection hung ghost-like in the curve of the field, a ragged boy, and behind him, the pillar of white gold light that he was going to become. "You saved everyone," the boy said. His voice cracked on it. He turned, and his dark eyes were wet and furious and overwhelmed, and about 9 other things at once. Everyone, Piccolo, Gohan, even. His gaze snagged on the floating armored shape of Vegeta, and his face did something complicated. Even him, you didn't even... He stopped, started again. You didn't even try. It wasn't even hard for you. No, the god admitted. It wasn't. Then why does it... The boy's voice broke all the way. He scrubbed at his eyes with a torn sleeve, angry at the tears, angry at his own exhaustion, angry in the specific way of someone who has spent everything he has and then watched a stranger do the whole thing effortlessly, with power to spare. Why does it look like it hurts you, doing it? Why do you look at all of us like, he searched for it, like you're saying goodbye to something? And there it was. The boy had seen it in under a minute. The thing the god had broken never saw. The thing 1 billion years of victories had built and hidden. The boy had looked past the impossible power straight into the loneliness underneath it, because the boy was the loneliness underneath it. Just younger, just before, just at the moment the ladder started. The god was quiet for a long moment. The dead planet's light washed over both their faces. "Because I know how it ends," the god said finally. "For you, for me. I know what you become." He gestured, a small motion, at himself, at the light he was made of, at the bending, untouchable enormity of what stood in the boy's future. "And I want to tell you not to. And I can't, because it's the same road that gets you strong enough to do this. The saved handful, the exploded grave, the caught friend. And I can't hand you the one without the other." The boy stared at him. The one without the what other? The god looked at his younger self, really looked, at the dark, ordinary eyes he'd traded away, at the desperation and the terror and the fierce mortal aliveness of a boy who still had rivals to fight and limits to break and a whole universe of people who could still, at any moment, be lost. And he understood, standing there in the cold light of the dead world, exactly what he had come down through all of creation to find. Not the fear. He told himself it was the fear. It wasn't. It was this aliveness, the thing that only exists when you can still lose. He had climbed so high and grown so strong that nothing could be taken from him anymore. And he had learned, too late, at the silent top of everything, that a thing which cannot be taken from you is a thing you have stopped being able to hold. He had traded every stake he had for the strength to protect them, and somewhere in the trade, the protecting had become the only thing left. An empty reflex swung at an empty sky, because there was no longer anyone strong enough to threaten what he loved, and so no longer any weight to loving it. The boy had everything the god had given away, and the god could not give it back to himself. But he was standing, right now, in front of the one person in all of creation he might be able to give it to, by warning, by witness, by the simple fact of being a future that could be seen and chosen against. "Listen to me," the god said, and knelt again, there in the floating stillness, with a dead planet's light on both their faces. "I'm not going to tell you how strong to get. You wouldn't listen. I didn't. A ghost of a smile, the first real one in an age. But I'm going to tell you the thing I wish someone had come back to tell me. And I need you to actually hear it, because I came a very long way to say it, and I'm only going to get to say it once." The boy went still. Even his ragged breathing quieted. "Don't climb to get away from losing them," the god said. "Climb because you love the climbing, and love the people you climb with. And if you have to fight to keep them, fight, and mean it, and be glad it costs you something." He held the boy's dark eyes with his silver ones. "The day it stops costing you anything is the day you've climbed too high, and you won't feel it happen. That's the trick of it. You'll just look up one day, and there'll be no one left across the ring from you, and no one behind you that anything could ever hurt, and you'll wonder why the winning went gray." His voice dropped, and for one instant it was not a god's voice at all, but a very tired man's. "Stay where it can still cost you something, as long as you possibly can. Promise me." The boy stared at him for a long, long moment. Then, slowly, the corner of his mouth pulled. Not a smile exactly, but the crooked, stubborn beginning of one. The exact expression the god remembered wearing at the bottom of every impossible fight he'd ever refused to lose. "That's a weird thing," the boy said, "for the strongest guy in the universe to be jealous of. And the god, the being nothing in creation could touch, the summit dweller, the ender of gods, laughed. Really laughed, surprised and unguarded and helplessly young, a sound he had not made in longer than most stars had been alight, and the bending white light of him rippled with it, and inside the bubble of impossible stillness, the ragged boy grinned back, exhausted and bloody and alive, so unbearably alive, and for one weightless moment across 1,000,000,000 years, the two of them were just Goku, laughing at the top of a fight he wasn't supposed to survive. Then the god felt the pull. It was faint at first, a tension along the thread he'd descended, the summit calling its own weight back, the way a held breath finally insists on being let go. He had come down through creation on a line, and the line would only give him so long this far below where he belonged. He could feel it now, the gentle, inexorable tug of a reality that did not have a drawer to keep him in, beginning to sort him back toward the top. He didn't have long. "You need to go," the boy said, watching his face, reading it, the way you can only read your own. "Don't you?" "Yeah," the god said, "in a minute." He looked at the floating handful of the saved, Gohan stirring, Piccolo's breathing already stronger, Krillin whole under Dende's hands, even Vegeta's body cradled gently in the light, to be brought home, and, this world's Dragon Balls willing, brought back. He had a minute. He knew, with a certainty that had nothing to do with power, exactly how he wanted to spend it. "Come here," the god said. "There's something I want to show you. It's not a technique, it's—" He searched, and found the word, and it surprised him. "It's a promise, about how far the road goes, so that when it gets bad, and it's going to get so much worse than this before it gets better, you'll know the ladder doesn't have a top. You'll know there's always another rung. Even here, even now. Especially now." And as the pull of the summit strengthened, as the light of the dead planet washed cold and silver over both their faces, the god reached out one glowing hand toward the ragged, exhausted, impossibly alive boy he had come across all of creation to find, and the boy, without hesitation, without fear, with the whole stubborn open heart the god had spent 1,000,000,000 years slowly forgetting he'd started with, reached back. Their hands were about to meet. And that was when the god felt something he had not felt in longer than he could name, something that stopped the breath in his chest, and turned his serene silver eyes wide, with an emotion no god is ever supposed to feel again. He felt a second pull on the thread behind him, not the summit calling him up, something else. Something vast and patient and waiting that had noticed a god step down off the top of everything and had begun, very slowly, from somewhere even higher, to reach down after him. The god turned his head toward the black between the worlds, and in the dark above the dead planet's light, where there should have been nothing at all, 2 points of cold attention opened like eyes. For 1 billion years the god had been the thing at the top of the sky. He had forgotten, completely, the way you forget the color of a room you've never once left, what it was to look up and find something looking back. The 2 cold points of attention hung in the black above the dead planet's fading light, and they were not stars, and they were not eyes, though the mind kept trying to call them eyes because the mind had no other word for 2 places in the dark that knew you were there. They did not blaze. They did not gather energy, or roar, or perform any of the 1,000 tells the god had spent eternity learning to read in an opponent. They simply regarded him, with the flat, patient interest of something so far above his own summit that it had noticed him step down off it, the way a man notices a single ant leave the hill. And the god understood, with a slow, cold clarity that started at the base of his spine and climbed, that in all his long reign at the top of everything, he had never actually reached the top of everything. He had reached the top of everything he could see. There had been more above him the entire time. There was always another rung. He had said it to the boy not a minute ago. The ladder doesn't have a top, as a gift, a comfort, a promise about how far the road goes. He had not known he was describing his own ceiling. "Get behind me," the god said. The boy didn't move. He was staring up too, dark eyes fixed on the 2 cold points, and his ravaged face had gone the specific gray of a person watching the one being he'd decided was invincible go still with something that looked, impossibly, like dread. "What is that?" he whispered. You just switched off Frieza like a light. You caught a planet. What in the world could make you look like?" "I don't know," the god said, and the honesty of it, the plain flat "I don't know," a phrase he had not had cause to use in longer than the boy's whole civilization had existed, rang in the cold air like a struck bell. "I don't know what it is. That's the part I can't." He stopped, made himself breathe, an old human habit his body remembered even now. "For a very long time, I have known everything about every fight before it started. I have known the ending the moment the beginning walked in, and I am looking at that, right now, and I do not know how it ends." The 2 points of attention drifted closer. The dark around them did not brighten, it deepened, as though they were less a presence arriving than an absence widening, a hole in the fabric of the between worlds through which something enormous was beginning, unhurriedly to look, and the god felt it. It came up through him like groundwater through dry earth, filling a riverbed that had been cracked and empty for 1 billion years. A fast animal tightening at the back of the throat, a cold prickle across skin that had not registered temperature since before the fall of the last god he'd broken, a quickening in a chest that had forgotten it could quicken. Fear. He felt fear, the very thing he had descended through all of creation to be near one last time, the taste of copper, the bright, unbearable certainty that the next few seconds mattered, that they could go wrong, that something he loved was standing right behind him in a torn orange gi, and actually could, for the first time in eons, be taken. He had come down looking for the feeling of the stakes. The universe, or whatever sat above the universe, had heard him, and answered, and handed him exactly what he'd asked for, with a price tag the size of everything. And the god, standing between the ragged boy and the 2 cold eyes in the dark, did the last thing his younger self expected, and the last thing the thing above them could have understood. He smiled. It was not brave. It was not defiant. It was relieved, the helpless, overflowing, slightly unhinged smile of a man dying of thirst who has just been shown water, even if the water is on the far side of a fire, because 1 billion years of gray victories had taught him a thing he could never have learned any other way, and it was this, that the terror singing in his blood right now, the not knowing, the this could go wrong, was not the opposite of being alive. It was being alive. It was the whole of it. It was the thing he'd traded away one rung at a time, until there was nothing left across the ring from him but his own reflection in an empty sky. He'd have paid anything to feel it again. He was about to. "Boy," the god said, not turning, keeping his silver eyes on the deepening dark. "Goku, I need you to do the 4 seconds thing again. Trust me." One more time. Behind him, he heard the boy plant his ragged feet, heard the exhausted, stubborn, gloriously mortal refusal in the intake of breath. "If that thing can scare you," the boy rasped, "then I'm not letting you stand in front of it alone. That's not. We don't do that. You know we don't do that. You're me." And oh, that landed. That went straight through the god's ancient chest and out the other side. Because it was true. It was the truest thing. It was the exact thing he had climbed so high to protect and had forgotten was the point. We don't do that. We don't let each other stand alone. The boy had it. The boy still had every scrap of it, undimmed, the thing the god had spent an age misplacing. "I know," the god said softly. "I know we don't, and that's exactly why you're going home." He moved his hand, a small motion, low, where the boy couldn't see it, and the thread he had descended on, the line that ran from this dead patch of space, all the way back up to the silent summit, he split, divided it, wove a second strand off the first, a short bright filament that led not up to his own impossible top of everything, but sideways and down, back along the groove of a world where a green planet had not yet died, where a boy in a torn gi was needed, where there was still a Frieza to face and a fusion to learn, and a lifetime of rivals and losses, and staggering, glorious, costly climbing left to do. "There's a whole life waiting for you," the god said. "It's got everything I told you about in it. The bad parts and the rungs above them. Don't you dare rush to the top of it." He could feel the two cold eyes fully open now, feel the enormous slow attention of the thing above the summit gathering itself toward the pair of them. And he had seconds, only seconds, and he spent them the way he'd spent the last minute, exactly, precisely, the way he wanted to. "Take them all home," he said, and around the boy the whole saved handful, Gohan, Piccolo, Krillin, Dende, and the cradled armored weight of Vegeta, gathered into the bright sideways filament, wrapped safe in the last of the god's untouchable stillness. "Wish your friends back. Grow up slow. And when you get strong enough that it stops costing you anything, stay where it can still cost me something," the boy finished, voice cracking, tears standing bright in his dark eyes, as he understood what was happening, as he understood he was being sent away, as he understood this stranger with his own face was choosing to stand alone, in front of the one thing in all of creation that could make a god afraid. "You already told me. I heard you. I'll remember. I swear I know you will," the god said. "You always were the stubborn one." And he pushed. Gently, so gently. The bright filament pulled taut, and the boy and everyone he loved slid down it and away, dwindling, the ragged figure straining against the current, with one hand still reaching back, the way he'd reached back on the shelf, the whole open, unguarded heart of him flung toward the god, across the widening dark. And the god raised his own glowing hand, and held it up, palm out, in the oldest and simplest gesture there is. "Not goodbye, not quite. Go on. I've got this. I'll see you at the top, and take your time getting there." The filament snapped bright, and the boy was gone, sent home safe down the groove of his own unfinished life, carrying a promise he would keep across every impossible fight still ahead of him, all the way to a top he would now, perhaps, know better than to reach too fast. And the god of the summit turned, alone at last, to face the two cold eyes in the dark. They had finished opening. The thing above the top of everything was fully looking at him now, and its attention was a weight the god had no name for, a pressure that made the crushed remains of a solar system feel like the first cool drop of a coming storm. It did not speak. It did not threaten. It merely regarded the small bright being who had climbed to the top of one sky and mistaken it for the last. And it began, with terrible unhurried patience, to reach. The god planted his feet on nothing. His aura, the standing pillar of white gold that had not truly flared in a billion years, flared now, roared up around him for the first time in an age, because for the first time in an age, there was something worth flaring for. The copper sang in his throat, his heart, his ancient forgotten heart, hammered like a boy's at the bottom of a fight he isn't supposed to win. He did not know how it would end. He was, at long, long last, afraid. And standing there in the cold dark above a dead world, with everything he'd remembered how to love now safe and dwindling down a thread toward home, the strongest being that had ever existed looked up at the thing that was stronger still, and, for the first time in a billion years, felt the whole gray weight of the summit lift off his shoulders, and grinned into the dark with his whole young heart, and thought, with a joy so fierce and clean it was almost unbearable, finally, "There's another rung,